Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to Cultish, Entering the Kingdom of the Cults. My name is Jeremiah Roberts. I'm one of the co-hosts here. And Pastor Jeff is not with us today, but I have someone with me, and he's actually here the first time in one of our recorded episodes. I'm here with Andrew, the super sleuth of the show, Andrew Super Sleuth Sonkrant. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Coming out of the dark to be on this episode today. It's great.
Yeah, so in case you're wondering who that red bearded guy is on the Cultish in Bed episodes, this is Andrew here, and he's just done an incredible job. If you've seen any of the previous episodes that we've done with all the research that's gone on, it's really really blessing to have you on here, man. I'm excited for this. So we are here with Clay Fry, and we're excited, and we want to jump right into this because you've got a whole bunch of notes there, and you're excited. So you were in the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and you were a Jehovah's Witness for 32 years.
Yeah, I was born into it. Both my parents, actually, my dad was, on my dad's side, we were 4 generations deep.
Wow.
So my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and before that, apparently we had pictures of them evangelizing on horseback, and my grandma had a picture of her with, they'd wear sandwich boards and they would protest in front of churches.
Wow.
And she had a sandwich board on that said, "Religion is a snare and a racket."
Wow. That's like, so it goes back almost to the beginning.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
well, not quite, yeah, but it's 1800s. But yeah, it does go back 70 or so years.
Okay,
and
wow.
my family on my dad's side. And then my mom was brought into the religion by a missionary in Taiwan. And then she moved to the States, and her and my dad got together, and in the womb they told me that they would read to me from the Great Teacher Book, which is a Watchtower publication about Jesus. And so they were really wanting me to be a super Jehovah's Witness.
Wow.
Yeah, I was groomed to become an elder.
Now you're talking to us.
Wow.
Yeah, no.
Praise
Yeah,
God.
it's definitely it's been a long journey to get to this point where I found Christ, and
Yeah.
that only means something to someone who's found Christ. You know?
And and I think it's really good for people to understand, because there's a lot of talk about Jehovah's Witness and the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and I mean that's one of the, when people hear the word cult, a lot of times that's like one of the first. I think that when we were doing this episode, we were launching Cultish. We just asked, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word cult? And the word was like Jehovah's Witnesses, Watchtower Bible Tract Society. That was a prominent answer. And so people have a lot of people have a lot of preconceptions about what it's like and what they do. And typically it's equated with people knocking on the door, at 7 a.m. And even to Leah Remini's show, we had a whole episode on that, talking about the special that they did, and that got a lot of buzz too. But I want to just kind of let's start at the beginning from your story. I mean, obviously you mentioned about when you were in your mother's womb, when they were reading these Watchtower literature to you, but talk about like your earliest memories of like just your childhood and what it's like, because I think this is a unique perspective that a lot of people don't know about, and I want to know about us too. So just give me like your earliest recollections of what it was like, and let's go from there.
Well, my parents were very devout, and they cared a lot about what God, about God in their life. And so they, like I said, were pretty strong in the way that they raised us in the religion. And we never missed meetings, but there was a period of time in California where we were raised where they were missing meetings, and they were feeling not very close to the religion. And they felt like California was just this cesspool, Sodom and Gomorrah type thing going on, and they wanted to get us out of there. So we ended up moving to Wyoming when I was 8 years old. Very conservative there, and Jehovah's Witnesses differ depending on where you go in the country. Even though they say they're unified, I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses on the West Coast are more liberal than Jehovah's Witnesses in the Midwest.
It really depends on the surrounding cultures, kind of how they adapt.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they really felt a lot more safe in that environment of conservative, Wyoming, it was a town of 3,500 people. There was only about 40 active Jehovah's Witnesses in the town. So we weren't allowed to be friends with anybody that wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. And so that was our family. That was the people that we hung out with.
Wow.
Yeah.
How old were you at that time?
8 years old when we moved to Wyoming. And going to school was a challenge. because you'd have to go in and tell them that you couldn't partake in most anything that was happening in the school.
Yeah.
Literally, it was nothing we could do. I mean, you couldn't celebrate birthdays. You couldn't pledge allegiance to the flag. You couldn't sing any Christmas songs. You couldn't sing any Halloween songs. You couldn't engage in any extracurricular activities. You couldn't do any pep rallies. So he ended up just being isolated most of the time and not partaking in anything. And he became very aloof to someone who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness, because they were just the Walking Dead as far as we were concerned.
Wow.
So Armageddon was coming any moment, and anybody who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness wasn't going to make it.
So so let's talk about we have an episode sometime we want to do about like the Jehovah's Witnesses and the end of the world, but just from your experience and perspective, I mean, as a kid, was there times where was that something that the way they would talk about the end of the world happening and anyone outside of Jehovah's kingdom was going to perish and it's going to be hell on earth and Armageddon, was that something that was fearful for you as a kid?
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you've ever seen any of the publications from the 70s, 80s when I was a kid, there's pictures that would, scare you to death of people getting buildings falling on them, catching on fire, horrible looks on their faces, dogs eating dead people. I mean, there was like really morbid pictures. And, years later, I mean, you can see a lot of things on YouTube right now where there's actually hidden pictures in the publications. There's hidden, you put a mirror on it, and you'd have to look at it on YouTube. But they're really scary looking
that's
pictures.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Really? Okay. Yeah. So talk about some times where, so you're growing up in the Watchtower, and you mentioned, so you were there you said you were in the Watchtower for 32 years. So we're talking about your childhood. So I'm trying to work along like a timeline. So you grew up in a lot of times people will grow up being part of something. Like a lot of times we do ministry to the Mormon Church and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or now I think they're just calling themselves now the Church of Jesus Christ. They changed their name. They're trying to get away from the name Mormon, but they can't escape it. So it's just interesting to see how that whole situation's changing. But a lot of times people will kind of grow up in the church and they'll just kind of go through the motions, but there's like a moment where they decide this is really something they're going to own for themselves. Was there a moment like growing up in the Watchtower where it was just, were you just kind of doing it? I mean, you're obviously you have to do what your parents do, and that's how I was like growing up in a Christian home. Were there moments where excuse me, you wanted to you want to just go ahead and just do your own thing? Maybe you want to do your own thing, or what was the time where you wanted to just you took ownership as this is what you like really believe?
Yeah, I really I did believe it in my own heart. There was a story my parents would always tell when I was a little kid in a diaper after one of our district conventions in, I think, Los Angeles, California. We're eating at McDonald's, and I was eating a cheeseburger, and I just stood up in my chair and said, "Mom and Dad, I sure do love Jesus," in McDonald's, and everybody heard me in the restaurant, and everybody thought it was really cute. And I think back at that time because I really did have a love of God in my heart that whole time. And I was rambunctious and always into stuff, a young boy like that, and I was in trouble a lot. And so the whole getting in trouble and being disciplined for me was a huge thing growing up. I was in trouble a lot, and I didn't really fall in line with the religion that much, but I know that I loved God because I would see a sunset or I would see something beautiful, and I would just spontaneously want to pray to God as a little kid. And I knew I loved him very much. And so there came a time, 13 years old was when I got baptized. And my parents definitely pushed me into it. I remember telling my dad I was afraid of getting disfellowshipped. I was like, I don't know if I want to get baptized because I don't want to get disfellowshipped. And he said, well, why would you break God's law and get kicked out of the religion? So I was like, well, yeah, why would I do that? Little did I know that once you get disfellowshipped, there's no legitimate way you can ever leave the religion. You can never, legitimately leave.
Yeah.
You can leave in dishonor, but you can't leave for any other reason. So I made that decision at 13. Mostly, though, that was a decision to serve God. And it wasn't the religion so much.
Let me ask you this, too. Like, what was you mentioned you just had this, like, genuine, like, childlike faith or, like, love for, like, God. But was that, I'll just say this, too, because, like, my first exposure, honestly, to the Jehovah's Witnesses was as a young child. We had a house fire where our house had burned down, and there's a bunch of people who just gave, and we lived up in Prescott, Arizona, and so like I was in the second oldest of 7, so the whole story of this family of like having their house burned down and essentially like living in someone else's house, we became like a whole story. Like our story was in the newspaper basically. But people just gave us a ton of different books because there's like it's like 7 kids, let's give them something to do. And back then we didn't have our phones and all that different stuff, so we had a bunch of different kids book they gave us. And so there's a Bible book that I picked up that someone gave us, and it was interesting because I'm going through it, and this is just interesting because I don't believe I came to genuine faith until I was around 17. But as a child, I am going through this book, and all of a sudden is going through the whole story of Jesus, and I'm identifying it because I grew up in a Christian household, and I get to the moment of the cross when Jesus was crucified. I'm like, wait a minute, Jesus isn't on a cross; he's on a stake, and I just felt this inclination as a child, and my stomach turned into knots. I put the book down, and I think I may even thrown it away, and I didn't even know where it was from. Yeah. And in hindsight, obviously, I now know. I just found that being interesting. But
the cross is actually something that's taught as a pagan symbol of the zodiac in that religion, and so it's looked as part of false religion. Wearing a cross. There's all kinds of stories. I remember thinking stories about crosses being demonized and possessed, and actually people coming into the Jehovah's Witness religion had to get rid of crosses.
Yeah.
And they had supernatural experiences of burning them and throwing them, and they came back, and stupid stories like that. But I mean, maybe that stuff happened. I don't know, but it's sensationalized a lot. There's a lot of sensational talk that went on when I was about demons and possession and scary, spooky stuff like that.
Okay. So you have a point where you call it, you take ownership of this becomes like you, and this becomes like what you believe, and so you're going to the different meetings and stuff. How you say we went to 5 different meetings a week?
Well, there was
around that?
There's actually Tuesday was a book study that was an hour long. Thursday was 2 meetings in one, which was the Theocratic Ministry School, and that was like where you would give talks and practice to be an evangelizer, and then another 1 hour. So that was a 2-hour meeting on Thursday, and then Sunday it was a 2-hour meeting, a Watchtower study and a public talk. And then Saturday we were usually knocking on doors. So we're pretty active all week, and that way you're accountable to the brothers and sisters, and they can call you on. And of course it was very works-based. So you could look at the numbers, whether somebody was up to snuff and, the hours and the meetings that they were attending. So, and if your ideas, and you also are very discouraged from ever studying the Bible as a group outside of those meetings, ever. Like brothers and sisters weren't supposed to study the Bible together on their own.
Wow.
So it was like not by itself, but either
there was no understanding of the Bible without the faithful and discreet slave, which they say is the governing body.
Right, right.
So you couldn't really understand it without them, with their mediating for it.
Yeah. In fact, when we did our last, when we did the episode on Leah Remini and the Jehovah's Witnesses, when we talked about the policy of blood transfusion, we opened up with a clip of Walter Martin when he was on the John Ankerberg show, and he talked about their belief about you can't give blood. And we obviously might be able to talk, we can probably talk about that sometime during this discussion, but the thing he said is that it's not, they don't believe you can do it. It's not because the Bible forbids it, because the Watchtower says the Bible forbids it, and that's really how they operate. So it's not just like we don't as Christians, like we go to the Bible, we want to look specifically at what it says, and even like when our Pastor Jeff, when he preaches something, he says, if there's something that I'm saying that's outside of this, like don't listen to me.
Right.
But with a governing body, the way that it works is that they say this is the way that it is. This is what it says. Like if you look at like the prologue in John 1:1, like in the beginning was the Word. It's that way because they say it's a God, because that's ultimately what the Watchtower says.
And then the danger of that, of course, is because they can change it as they go. Because back in the day, no blood at all, nothing. It's wrong. You'll get disfellowshipped. Anybody that got a blood transfusion during that time got disfellowshipped. And lost everything. Then all of a sudden later they said, oh well, we can use blood fractions.
Right.
We can use parts of it.
Yeah.
Which is like saying I can have the ham or the pickles or the mayonnaise of a ham sandwich, but I can't have a ham sandwich.
Right. Didn't you say, Andrew, in your research about they change them in regards to like the plasma and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
what are some of the things that you remembered off of that?
Yeah, they can use pieces of the blood, like
Platelets.
specific. Yeah, they'll
The
break
parts
it down.
they can break it down and use.
and just not the full blood in itself.
So what about all those people that got kicked out and lost God's favor for using it at all, and then the people later, but they don't ever address that. It's just, well, we're continually getting brighter and brighter light from God.
Right.
So
Were there like moments in hindsight? I mean, I've had those times where you're going like, so there's some sort of circumstance that all of a sudden it becomes you view something in hindsight and you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense why this was that way. So being in hindsight, we just talked about, you mentioned like disfellowshipping, like growing up in the Watchtower. Were there times where you saw that, or maybe you saw something going on where you sensed that there was something that's off? Like all of a sudden someone's in the Watchtower, but all of a sudden, why is that person gone?
Yeah.
Like what happened? Did you experience that? And if
oh
that's
yeah,
the case,
I've
like,
experienced it with my own family. My sister had a crisis of faith at 19 years old and left abruptly from our family and the religion to another town, and she went to a party and got raped. And
was she older than you?
no, she was younger than me.
Oh, okay.
And
Wow.
she didn't tell us any
man.
of this until like after it happened, and it had its effect on her. And she went to the elders, and they disfellowshipped her out of the congregation for that, because I don't know the exact reasons why, but she was disfellowshipped, and then she had to earn her way back.
After
and
being raped.
after being raped.
There wasn't any.
There was no, because she
was
had
just-
grown, I think part of it was because she had grown up in that little tiny congregation, and those guys knew her. They were really disappointed with her for doing that and ending up, because my mom said that the rape was something she deserved because she broke God's law.
Wow. So there's no justice.
No.
Really, it's just let's give her more shame.
Yeah.
So then we can just make her yoke even
Yes. And
stronger
so
on her.
It crushed her. She started, cutting herself, hurting herself. And I went to help her. And then all of a sudden I was on the chopping block, and they called me into the back room and said, you're going to get disfellowshipped if we see your sister's car over at your house anymore. And I
you're
was
and you're just like, your little sister's been
Yeah.
been raped,
yes,
and
trying to help her.
you're just trying to be a big
Yeah.
brother,
Yeah.
and they're saying like, no,
Yeah.
like stay away, like,
Yeah.
wow.
So yeah, there wasn't a lot of comfort there, and the information that I was learning since I was a little kid in the religion was the same information over and over and over again, and I just started seeing it. Like, I made the decision to stay. I mean, I got baptized at 13, went through high school, and I definitely was thinking about leaving the religion then. So I engaged in some stuff that wasn't Christian, and so I confessed that stuff, and I got disfellowshipped. And I had to earn my way back. My parents immediately disowned me, kicked me out of the house, and I was homeless. I moved to Denver, and I was homeless in Denver. Then I finally got reinstated there, going to meetings on my own and getting myself back there. Once I was reinstated, then my parents came down and helped me get an apartment and helped me get on my feet.
Wow.
And yeah, that happened. And then I got married.
Wait, real quickly, when you got disfellowshipped, we talked about this, and I'm curious about this. One of the things that in the Leah Remini episode, when they were interviewing people who had left the Watchtower, and you talked about their policy where, like, they say don't even look into their eyes.
Yeah.
That was the case in your experience?
Oh yeah, you have to go to these meetings for them to see that you are repentant, that you're coming back and earning your way back, but you're not allowed to talk to anybody. So you're required to come late and leave early.
Okay.
So you don't talk to anybody, and of course everybody ignores you. So you don't.
Wow.
But when I started first going to Denver, nobody knew me, so I would show up and everybody tried to talk to me, and I'd have to be like, I'm disfellowshipped, you can't talk to me.
So it's basically like unclean.
Yeah, like I'm a leper. Yeah.
What I find extremely terrifying in that situation is that, if we were to talk about our church, or if there's ever a moment where some member's salvation was in question, what do we go to? We go to the gospel. The gospel is what you need. Instead, it sounds like what they do with this disfellowshipping, it's like, it's not the gospel. Like, your poor sister was raped. Let's not give her the gospel and the freedom and the comfort in Christ, but instead, let's just give her works.
Yeah.
Let's give her works. Let's take the gospel away, and let's give them works.
Yeah. Like, you didn't appreciate
terrifying.
it. You took it for granted, so now you need to earn it back through these works.
Where's the gospel?
Which is so depressing. And so, yeah, that happened, and that really was a wake-up call. I couldn't stand that. And after I got reinstated, I earned my way back, and then that's when that stuff with my sister happened.
Yeah.
And I was married at the time, had my own situation, and after that happened with my sister, I was really disillusioned. And this whole time, I guess, being in the religion, I didn't have that hope. The works, are never going to be up to snuff with God, and you feel that.
Yeah.
So every witness that I knew was pretty depressed and addicted to alcohol. And, you don't really talk about it. Alcohol's allowed because, of course, Jesus turned water into wine, so it's not restricted. But, of course, you're not supposed to be a drunkard. But you just get really good at hiding it, because there's really wasn't a lot of relief for any of us in that situation. And I didn't even know at the time that I had an alcohol problem. So when I realized I had a problem with alcohol, I go to the elders for help, and they absolutely had nothing for me. I just remember feeling so let down. They didn't have any answers. They didn't even know what the definition of an alcoholic was. I had to go, and that was when the internet was fairly new. I was getting on the internet and scouring it, what is going on? Why can't I stop drinking? What's wrong with me? You know? And I'm going to the elders, they're just like, how much is too much? And I'm like, okay, so I had to go down and break down how much is too much. 1.5 ounces is a shot. And I'm like,
wow.
This is how much I'm drinking, And they're like, wow, that's a lot. How do you even drink that much? And I'm like, I don't know. Help me out. They had nothing.
Wow.
So I ended up checking myself into rehab. And very, just unhappy. In rehab, I remember sitting there in rehab, and I was getting close to these people. I was feeling, I was talking about stuff I'd never been able to talk about. And there's no witnesses around. My parents came for family day, and they're just like, oh my God, we just hate seeing you hanging out with all these worldly losers, And I'm like, well, I'm one of them right now, So that really opened my eyes to the religion having no power.
Yeah.
Wow.
At all. And I'm sitting there going, why am I even doing this? This is nothing for me. I mean, I have no help whatsoever. I'm getting more help from a worldly, secular, rehab place. And of course they had us go to AA then, and in AA they tell you that you have a spiritual disease when you're addicted to something. And that made no sense to me either. I'm like, look at all my works. I'm going to all these meetings, I'm evangelizing, I am trying, more than anybody else I know. And so how would I have a spiritual disease? So it made no sense to me. And yet the religion let me down. All these people, weren't happy. I didn't see anybody. They were saying, oh, we're the happiest group and all. And I was looking around going, well, we know how to put on a happy face, and we know how to, take a bath, shave, put on nice clothes.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much enough for most people. But underneath, it was like we were all very unhappy and didn't really have a hope. You were just waiting. In fact, I had somebody tell me that alcoholics were Jehovah's Witnesses were a bunch of alcoholics waiting for the end of the world. And I couldn't really argue with that.
It's really sad.
Wow. I got a question, man. When you're talking about how everyone's just their workspace and they're having to do all this performance stuff, and it's a matter of just keeping busy, and you never really know if you're enough. And maybe we could talk about this. I mean, I know there's the doctrine where they take the interpretation of Revelation about the 144,000 being saved, and they've had to re-describe and reinterpret that, but we can talk about it in a second. But what I'm thinking about is just there's the culture of people depressed and sad.
Yep.
But was there a culture where it's everyone knows, if I'm with you, I'm sad, I'm depressed, I know that you're depressed, and I know that you know that I'm depressed, but I can't. I'm too afraid to talk about it because I don't know.
We're supposed to be the happiest.
We're not. Yeah, and I don't know. If I don't know who I can confide in and who I can't, because if I talk about what I'm actually feeling and actually doing, then I'm going to be in trouble.
Yeah, you will.
And that's why I think a lot of times I think Andrew, you talked about the amount of mental health. Remember the statistics you gave about people who are in the Watchtower and just
very
people
high.
Very high.
Yeah, higher than any other religion.
Yeah, it's very high.
Yeah.
Because one of the aspects of the whole therapeutic process is that people need to talk through their stuff. And it doesn't matter too, and it's interesting too is that we came out of this cultish, we're part of Apologia Studios, which is a part of Apologia Church. We planted out of a drug and alcohol recovery center. So our church was 90% addicts. So everyone has, and regardless, I mean, everyone has their issues, and the one you want, and people have to be able to talk and sort through that stuff. I think when you have a culture and environment where you can't do that, it just creates
Because
a realm
when the
where it
religion
gets worse. Yeah.
When the religion stops working, you're not allowed to say it stops working. Be like, well, that's not working for me. Well, then something's wrong with you.
Right.
And that's really, in the end, I mean, I realize that's not how it works at all. God is very kind and loving, and he does give you relief. But it takes the right kind of understanding of God to have that true relief.
Yeah.
So, that isn't really present with the witnesses. In fact, they every year have the memorial of Christ's death with the communion, and everybody passes it up. And they just let the bread and wine go right by, and it's actually a sin to partake of the bread and the wine. If you're not of the 144,000, if you go to grab it and feel like you are, I've seen attendants pull it back from people and be like, what are you doing? Because it's just unheard of. There's a few, I think there was 3 people growing up in all my years that had professed to be of the anointed. And they were usually very older, that was kind of the prerequisite, is they had to be older. They had to have been in the religion a long time. Their works, of course, had to be sparkling.
Yeah.
All of the boxes checked.
So really, I'll let you jump in, Andrew. So basically, the 144,000, it was kind of like this
elite group within.
Yeah, but it's more like how there wasn't a definitive. There's no way to truly know,
right?
Like that you're part of it. I mean, I think I've done enough, and I think I have more credentials than you because I'm older, or I've put in more hours going door to door.
Yep.
But kind of like in the same way when we talk to like Mormons, whether they know they can make it, like to the celestial kingdom, or if they're worthy, or if they're going to achieve exaltation, if they truly have done everything. I've never met a person who's been able to get a definitive yes. I think I've done enough. So I can definitely see that similarity. Andrew, what did you want to jump on real quickly?
Yeah. So my question is, because it's so works based, are there performance reviews? Who's doing these reviews on you? What does it look like? Take us through, going door to door, evangelizing, and sitting down, I'm thinking with your elders maybe, like, what are they telling you about your works? How are they analyzing you?
Well, every month you turn in a service report of how many hours you put in evangelizing, and how many return visits you made on people, how many books you placed, how many Bibles, how many magazines. That's all kept track of. And then the Theocratic Ministry School I mentioned is the evangelizing school that everybody partakes in. The women are not allowed to preach from the pulpit, but they do Bible study skits. Like they do little skits.
Yeah.
Like acting. Like, hey, how's it going? Acting like we're having a conversation out in the field.
Yeah.
And then you get critiqued on that from the stage. And there's records kept of that, to show your progress. And so, yeah, it's all very, very kept track of, very organized and documented.
Wow.
So, yeah, you know exactly where you stand.
Okay. Real quickly, I'm just curious. So the 144,000, there are obviously more members in the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society than 144,000. How did this originate? How did that interpretation originate? And then talk about, because I know it got redefined, but I don't really know too much except of them saying the 144,000 is little. That's about all I know. But talk about that if you can.
Well, the layman Jehovah's Witnesses is part of what they call the great crowd.
Yeah.
The multitude. And the 144,000 are the anointed remnant. So the anointed remnant are going to rule with God, up in heaven over the people who stay on earth. Because, of course, the Jehovah's Witnesses don't really have a heavenly hope. They have an earthly hope of living forever in paradise on earth. And I think that goes back to Adam and Eve when God said, be fruitful and become many and, fill the earth. There was no death at that point before they sinned. So they say God's original plan was for us to be on this planet and live forever because there was no death until they sinned. So that's the hope that he still holds out for us, is to live forever in a paradise on earth. And most Jehovah's Witnesses would tell you, I don't want to go to heaven. I don't want to be in a paradise on on earth.
Yeah.
Like heaven would be on earth as it is in heaven. So what's the difference? So the anointed are just kind of like guys who get to wear king hats up there and sitting around in a circle with God and rule over all the people on the planet.
Yeah, I remember just seeing a lot of the like the literature and the way to describe it, and as a kid, I'm like, really? Is that what it is?
And correct me if I'm wrong too, but there's no one that could possibly be of the anointed class anymore. It's like
Right.
the generation's gone, so
Yeah.
you can't. It's not possible to work your way up to the anointed class anymore. There was a
Yeah.
specific generation that has to do with the prophecy of the second coming of Christ. Well,
Right.
And they and they kind of had a phenomenon happening. I don't know if it still is, but a few years ago I was reading about how the anointed numbers were actually going up. The closer they got to that cutoff of people being too old for that generation in 1914, that the numbers were more people were professing to be of the anointed,
Right.
which is strange.
That's very strange.
The number should be going down the
Yeah,
closer
yeah.
we get to Armageddon, but instead it was going up.
Yeah.
Like, I'm on in.
This is what I'm curious about too, is that you mentioned just a little bit, and we always have to be careful, like how much we talk before a podcast, because then we want to save all the goodies for here.
Right.
So you said there's a significance in the date of 1914, like why, is it Charles T. Russell who picked that specific date, or
Yeah.
why he picked the return of Christ? Explain to him, like, what was his reasoning for picking that date?
He took a special trip to Egypt and counted the stones in the Pyramid of Giza. The Pyramid of Giza, he felt, was God's living testament to mankind. And so he went over there and did some math, counted up some stones, and came up with 1914 as the end, or beginning of Christ's reign. That's when Jesus Christ was put on his throne as the king,
Wow.
according
So-
to them.
Right.
That's fascinating, because we had an episode recently when we talked about a different Mormonism and their connection to Egypt and Egyptology. There's a whole book in their scriptures, The Pearl of Great Price, the Book of Abraham, in which he tried to translate the lost books of Abraham off his funeral papyrus, but it was actually funerary documents. We went into detail of that, but I find it fascinating because we've talked a lot about God's law and his view of the occult and what God calls it, like an abomination, and pretty much all of Egypt's spirituality was
About control.
It was all completely pagan, completely occultic, completely under the category of what God calls an abomination, satanic, demonic, all of the above.
That's where the cult principles, the controlling the masses, originated.
Yeah, and Charles T. Russell believes he wants to attain a special hidden knowledge, and he goes to Egypt, and that's fascinating. In fact, when we were doing research, Andrew, didn't we look at his tombstone, Charles A. Russell's tombstone? It's got all
It's an 11-foot pyramid.
that
has the big Mason symbols all over it, and that's what they were into. And if you do research into the Masons, dark occultism is part of their deal, and it's scary that was the roots of my religion. And I think that's the mistake most witnesses make, is they don't research the roots of where it actually come from. And I know that's happening with Mormonism right now. And if you go back into their early writings, it kind of eviscerates them right now. It just exposes them for what they really
use
are.
you go to their
Old
own
teachings.
Right. In fact, we've mentioned before, Walter Martin, in his talk, The Baptism of Boldness, you guys can listen to the entire sermon on one of our previous episodes. But Walter Martin just had this serrated edge, incendiary way he would talk. But he talked about how he would use his own, the cults, when he would engage them, he would always just use their own materials and sources. And he was like a walking library. But he had this moment where he said the twitching corpse of Mormonism will be its head will be cut off from its own archives, going to the original source materials. I find it incredibly ironic, and I talked to you about this, Andrew, the fact that Charles T. Russell's grave is basically a symbolic prediction of his prophecy in 1914 that the world was going to end, which never happened. So I think the fact that you have a man who's dead, within this whole gravestone, is basically around a time when the world was going to end or Christ is going to return, which never took place. It's basically a symbolic gesture of a false prophecy.
Yeah, really is.
Talk about irony.
Yeah. And the more we get into the system of things and we realize the symbology of Masonry and all these secret societies and what their agendas really are, you can see that's what their agenda was the whole time in promoting these religions.
Yeah.
And downplaying Christ as a created being, downplaying communion. Oh, let's not do that. Even though God said to do it, this religion tells you not to, and
Yeah.
I mean, and how do they do that? That's what I was trying to get to the bottom of after I left was, if I'm going to leave this religion and be at peace with it, I have to debunk it to the core
Yeah.
of it for myself.
Yeah, and so one of the things I just find fascinating with everything that you're saying, I mean, you talk about people who are left the Watchtower and just the feeling of like that doubt and going online and finding out things about like 1914 or like the 144,000 and all those different sorts of things. And so a lot of time that just led to people being disgruntled or disenfranchised and just sort of really vicariously like rebelling in their lifestyle with how they are just living their lives now with where they previously were, the Watchtowers. So just talk real quickly just about where you were with getting back into, you're back into A, and talk about that.
Yeah, I went to rehab early on, but it didn't stick. I stayed sober for close to a year, and then things just fell apart. I believe that God was tearing, hindsight 2020. God was just tearing my life down to the end, to the bare bones.
Just humbling you.
He was humbling me, and every identity I had, being a Jehovah's Witness, being a construction carpenter, self-employed, being married, having a house, having dogs, having family, friends, all of that was gone pretty quickly after I started drinking again. And I wanted it to go. I really was so sick of it. I realized none of it. My wife was not there for me. She had been cheating on me and I didn't know it. Kind of one of those deals, where you're just blind. You're blinding yourself to the reality of the situation, and just a lot of things were wrong. And so I let it all go. And I was very angry. And of course, when you grow up a Jehovah's Witness, they demonize Christendom, Christianity. All other Christianity is false religion. I mean, look, just, everybody uses a cross. That right there is just going to tell you they're off base, from what you learn as a Jehovah's Witness. So all Christianity was demonized to me. The Jehovah's Witness church wasn't something I was ever going to do again. And so I still had a huge spiritual need. And I remember praying to God and just saying, please show me what to do. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I had this huge craving for God and something in my life, but there was nothing that I could do. There was no group that I wanted to be part of after that experience. Groups of any kind just made me kind of sick to my stomach. And Christianity, it just seemed like the Bible was something that you couldn't depend on. I mean, after my experience, that's what it would teach you. Yeah. Works, you're never going to do it. God is a jerk who expects you to do all this stuff, and you can't do it. You can't ever live up to it. So I was just resigned at that point that I was going to die at Armageddon, which is kind of like hellfire. But, Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in hellfire, so you're just going to die. You're ceased to exist. In fact, they don't believe in the immortal soul.
Right.
Yeah. So there was going to be no existence for me after I died. And I figured all I could do was make the best life I could here. And so I, mostly from girlfriends that were spiritual, into yoga and different things, I started just getting into New Age things. I went to yoga teacher training. I did mushroom trips with shamans. I did, all kinds of stuff that as a Christian I shouldn't have done, but it was like, hey, man, there is no God. The Bible isn't, anything. It's just a messed up. To me, it felt like they had taken the Bible. Maybe once upon a time it was a sacred book, but this world had just chopped it up and turned it into the evil that it was now.
Right. Yeah. Like it says in God's word that the gates of hell will never prevail against the church. But if you're going and speaking to an organization who's saying, no, it has, look, the cross itself is a pagan influence.
Yes.
We need to restore the church, and only us as the organizing members of the body or the governing body can actually give you the truth.
Yeah.
You can't even read the Bible on your own without understanding it. Yeah. Where are you going to go?
And in a disfellowshipped state, I had no way to pray to God. They said that God would not listen to my prayers, and there was no way I could come back to God except coming back to the church and getting God that way. So
they essentially condemn you.
Yeah. So to me, there was like the only spiritual connection I could have was not God, whatever, something else. So I was like, okay, well, that's fine then. I'm going to just try everything else. And God protected me through that time. Luckily, He protected me enough. He let me feel quite a bit of stuff that I went through, and it taught me the way. I mean, I kept coming back to Him But, I did that for a lot of years. Just ping-ponging off of this spirituality, that healing modality. I spent a lot of money and a lot of time on different things, Reiki, eye light therapy, just so many different things over the years. I could go through all the weird modalities. I would try anything because I wanted God so much.
So would you say that a lot of like the occultism and the New Age practices that you're talking about getting into, would you say there's just an appeal of people who have come out of the world of the cults to get into that? Because at least from my perspective, I would see the appeal that you can kind of get the spirituality and the experiences and all those things that typically come with a lot of the New Age spirituality. We had an episode with Stephen Bancars talking about the world of the New Age. We kind of jumped in and did an introductory episode in regards to that. But would you say that's something that was an appeal to both yourself, and do you think that's just an appeal to cultists coming out of a cult in general?
Well, a lot of I got really excited before 2012. I was listening to guys like David Wilcock. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Yeah.
And he uses the Law of One series, which I think is channeled material from Ra. And I was kind of into that for a long time. Book Course in Miracles. But pre-2012, there was the whole concept of the ascension happening. And that's kind of a Christian concept, really, and the only person I've ever known to ascend was Jesus.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we were all thinking that our consciousness was going to raise to the point where we would ascend to another dimension. Right. And in that dimension, this world was going to be made back into a paradise the way God wanted it. So in my mind, it was kind of like mixing Jehovah's Witness stuff, Christianity, and it was all coming together for me into this, thing that kind of made sense to me.
Yeah, wasn't 2012? Wasn't that the big thing?
Mayan
was the
calendar.
Mayan calendar?
Yeah.
They made the movie off of it. The movie is so terrible. Oh my gosh!
And see, with my eschatology as a Jehovah's Witness, this made more sense to me than the religion did at this point. And so I was really excited for 2012 to come, and I was doing everything. I was trying to eat and get my body in alignment and do yoga and and then 2012 came and went and nothing happened. It was very and then things just started getting worse after that.
So would you say after 2012, when it came and went, was there a level of just disappointment and burnout? I would also think too, just in regards to when you were in the Watchtower and just your experience growing up there, 1975, when the end of the world prediction came and went, there are a lot of people who left because they are burnt out as well. Would you say in that context, and also when 2012 came and went, was that your experience as well too? It made you maybe rethink stuff and maybe figure out, where do I go from here?
Yeah, I mean, it's just but everything that's secular and doesn't really have God's true power lets you down in the end. Yeah. And that's what I feel like God was just showing me, letting me, he's like, knock yourself out. Try to find something that has, what I have. So I did. I tried, and every single one of them, I mean, there was no healing. I had CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress from everything that I had been through over all these years.
Oh, yeah.
Had culminated in me being able to not really handle much at all. I was anxious mess, angry, fits of rage. I couldn't really control those, and it was affecting all of my relationships. And it was really a hard time through all that, and I was seeking healing. I mostly was just like, I have got to get this in control. I'm not going to have a life, So that's why I spent so much money and time seeking my healing, and nothing ever helped. It seemed I would always get my hopes up, this costs $275. I bet you this one's going to work.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I would get done, and I would feel that hopeful feeling, and then weeks would go by, and I'd be in the same boat. But you just kind of forget that I spent all this money, and this is supposed to be taken care of, but it's still here. So what do I do now?
All right, so this is a good segue just to wrap up the first part of this discussion/interview. I'm really been fascinated by the first part of this discussion, and I'm excited for where this is going to go.